Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome back to No Blocks. Today, I've got another deck tech, surprise, surprise, with Jude Cornett, who won the Gungai Games RTN a couple weeks ago on Kayo. I was there. I got to meet him, hang out with him a little bit, and he was down to link up and do a little deck tech for everybody. So if you're looking for somebody to get a little bit armed and dangerous with this RTN season, I think this is the right spot for you. And without any further ado, all right, Jude, welcome to No Blocks. I saw you top an RTN out in Portland at Gungai Games. Spoiler alert, I hear you just topped another one on Prism, but we're here for Kayo today. For everybody at home who may not know who you are, you want to tell us a little bit about yourself and your flesh and blood history?
Yeah, so I've been playing Fab for just under 3 years now. I started playing right before Outsiders released. I was a Dromai player for the longest time, and then once Dromai LL'd, I've just been kind of playing a lot of different decks. As you know, I've kind of gotten more cards and been able to play more decks. I played KO to an RTN win last weekend, and I'm excited to share the deck with everyone.
Awesome. We're glad to have you on here. I really appreciate your time. Did you have any shout outs or anything you'd like to do up at front? Because I know that's when everybody's watching, so I want to give you the chance to get as many views or hits as you possibly can.
Yeah, I want to shout out my team, Team Snapdragons. We had a decently good year this year, and we're definitely feeling like 2026 is going to be a big step up for the team in terms of both content and finishes. Other than that, I'm the Judester, pretty much on most platforms, Blue Sky, X, Discord. Um, so if my DMs are open, not for anything other, and not in a weird way, but if you ever have any questions, feel free to ask.
Yeah, send all your Verdant's feet pics to him. He loves those. All right, so the deck tech. We got KO Armed and Dangerous, which everybody should be aware of because that's why they clicked on the video, unless they're just here for you, which is possible. For anybody who's just looking around and needs a little bit more information, I'm pretty sure everybody knows how to read, but for those who don't, we got attack action cards you own get +1 while they are in any zone other than the combat chain. The first time you discard a card with 6 or more attack during each of your action phases, create a might token. So we're going to try to keep it relatively simple, not go over every single card. I'll let you kind of guide us. But for people that are trying to figure out what decks they want to play, what made you go with KO and like what's the appeal?
Yeah, so the big thing that KO has in comparison to a lot of other brutes is generally what LSS does is they kind of restrict the amount of 6 power attacks that brute gets access to at blue. And the
Mm-hmm.
thing that's really powerful about KO's hero ability is that basically it means that if you wanted to, you could have every card in your deck be 6 power and still run a reasonable amount of blues. Because while there aren't very many 6 power blue sixes, there are a lot of blue fives, and so KO turns all of these fives into sixes, basically allowing you to have a lot more consistency with a lot of your discard effects. Other than that, you get a lot of additional value out of his hero ability because it helps you win clashes because you own cards while they're on top of your deck, which means that you're going to be basically the best deck at clashing in the game. You can sometimes lose to decks like Guardians or on the Brute Mirror, but
Mm-hmm.
you will win most clashes that you do. And then additionally, you also, because you get a might every turn, you don't get a might every turn, but every time that you're able to discard a card on a turn, which is pretty easy to do with cards like Bare Fangs or Wild Ride, you're just going to get an additional point of value provided that you attack on the following turn. So they combine to make a deck that's very consistent and also has very good offensive numbers.
Got it. And then for the equipment suite, we got looks pretty standard. We do got the new tech from the new set, Gauntlets of Tyrannical Rex. Any reason you're running these over the other ones? I forget what they're called right now, but
Apex Bonebreaker.
yeah.
So it's pretty interesting. Gauntlets, when I was first looking at it, I wasn't even sure if I wanted to play Gauntlets over Apex Bonebreaker.
Mm-hmm.
But the more that I played with Gauntlets, I think that it's actually much, much better than Apex Bonebreaker. Because one of the things about Brute is because most of your cards cost 2 or 3 resources, you'll often get in these scenarios where you will have a resource floating. And what that means is that over the course of like an 8-turn game, you will often find yourself activating Gauntlets of Tyrannical Rex like 3 to 4 times.
Got it.
And 6 value on your arm piece is pretty great.
Yeah.
Like Gauntlets combined with some of KO's other options mean that you basically have one of the best equipment suites in the game outside of heroes like maybe Florian or Verdance with Stormstriders or Face Purgatory.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and yeah, Gauntlets it's very powerful, and then also you get offensive output from your equipment, as well as being able to help you defensively not have to block with cards from hand and let you keep larger hands to just send your big numbers.
Got it. That makes sense. Then we got the Mandible Claw. Obviously, I don't think we need to talk on that. That's the best brute weapon in the game for now, until KO LLs, and then he doesn't have to worry about it. Savage Sash, I think, is pretty standard. Correct me if I'm wrong. And then Scowling, probably one of the best headpieces in the game, in my opinion, at least.
Yeah.
Block Intimidate on an enemy's turn, so pretty sick.
Yeah, it's pretty great. KO is like one of very few decks in the game that gets to disrupt your opponent on their turn. Like decks like Icelander can do it as well, or sometimes you can pseudo disrupt your opponent with like Verdance, where you force them to hold up resources on your turn to not die to Stormstriders.
Mm-hmm.
But most disruption in this game comes on the players. Like if I'm KO and I'm trying to disrupt my opponent, it's coming on KO's turn.
Mm-hmm.
But Fleshbag being able to disrupt your opponent on their turn means that really while Fleshbag is on the table, your opponent has to always be thinking about it, and so you often get a lot of implied value from your opponent trying to play around it, even when you don't actually block with it on that turn.
Got it. And then down to the main 49, what should we touch on first, Sensei?
Yeah, so I think the biggest new stuff that KO has gotten is a lot of the cards from Super Slam, and specifically the 6 or more in your pitch zone mechanic, where because KO's 5s are now 6s, generally the trade-off with these, if you have a card with 6 or more power in your pitch zone, they're assuming that in order to get this beneficial effect, you're playing cards that are somewhat below, or you're pitching cards that are somewhat below rate, because most cards that are 6 power are yellows or reds.
Mm-hmm.
But if you look at the core rate of cards, like 3 for 7 is rate. Buckwild is you effectively trade a point of block, which generally the deck doesn't want to be blocking that much anyway,
Mm-hmm.
for a card that you basically always has go again, unless your hand is 3 Blood Rush Fellows. But if your hand is 3 Blood Rush Fellows, you have bigger problems than your Buckwild not having go again, usually. Other than that, Fearless Confrontation is a new-ish card that we've gotten. It's functionally another copy of Agile Windup or Mighty Windup. The reason why I'm running 3 Fearless and 2 Mighty Windup rather than maxing out on the Windups before the Fearless is even though the Windups do generate more tokens when you discard them, Fearless blocking for 3 is pretty good. And one of the things that has gotten better about the deck, in my opinion, compared to pre-Super Slam, is the deck functionally just blocks more reasonably, especially with some other new cards that we've gotten in Super Slam in the Smash Ups. So Vigorous Smash Up is incredibly strong. You don't really want to block with the deck, but sometimes you have to.
Mm-hmm.
And when you do have to, the smash ups are really good because they get you extra value. Normally, the cost curve that KO will work on is you want to play either a Buckwild, pitching a blue, and then you want to use your gloves and then send a 2-cost attack, which usually is in the realm of like 14 to 17 damage, or you want to play a Wild Ride, then pitch a blue to swing Claw, and then end with a 2-cost attack. The Vigor doesn't usually fit into that super well, but sometimes you have to block, and on the turns that you have to block, the Vigor can often enable some pretty gross stuff.
Mm-hmm.
For example, if you have a 2-cost attack in your arsenal and a Wild Ride and a blue in your hand, you can Wild Ride, assuming you don't draw and discard a non-6 off the top of your deck. You then are guaranteed to be able to play your 2-cost, sending usually something like a 3-card 15 for a 4-card 18 on the turn value cycle, which is pretty good and better than what most decks can do in the game, even if you aren't sending any on hits.
Awesome. Sorry, I had to sneeze.
No worries.
Okay, and then I also see that you got like Smashing Ground on here as well from Super Slam. I think kind of just goes in with exactly what you
Yeah,
said on hit
yeah.
arsenal.
This card works pretty well with the gloves. It's also pretty good when you're in Blood Rush mode, where all of your attacks have +2. Um, Most of the blues you're not trying to cast particularly often. I think Run Roughshod is the one that I play the most, but or perhaps Blue Buckwild. But in general, the blues are here to be pitched and then mostly blocked with or played in if you really have to.
Got it. Okay, and then obviously we got Beast Withins and your Blood Rushes. Let's just touch on that real quick for somebody who might be new, because this is pretty much core
Yep.
gameplay as far as I'm aware.
Yeah. So Blood Rush Fellow is pretty much the most powerful card that Brute has access to. Um, because it draws you 2 cards, even considering that you play a card and you discard a card and you spend a resource, you're effectively spending a resource. Like you're only losing a resource in order to play this card. And what it gets for you is if you have a 4 or a 5 card hand, you're usually able to play 2 to 3 brute attacks after resolving Blood Rush Fellows because Mandible Claw gets affected by Blood Rush.
Mm-hmm.
And so in that scenario, if you're able to play 3 brute attacks, you effectively spent 1 resource to get +6. And that sounds pretty good, but it gets even crazier when you consider that 1 resource is not 1 card, it's a third of a card in an ideal world, which
Mm-hmm.
means that Blood Rush can often be somewhere in the range of like a 1 card 12 to a 1 card 18. Meaning that if you get the opportunity to resolve a Blood Rush fellow, it's usually worth it to do it, because it will automatically get you your Might for KO. It will give your Mandible Claw go again, allowing you to scale your hands. And it also works really well with Beast Within, because you get into these scenarios where you have, say, any red attack in your arsenal, you block with a card on your opponent's turn, you pitch a blue to play Blood Rush Fellow, discarding Beast Within, and then you effectively get the benefit of a 4-card hand while being able to block out some of your opponent's on-hits on their turn. And so Beast Within, especially when you obviously you can set it up with Blood Rush Fellow, but even when you randomly draw and discard it off of something like a Wild Ride, it's incredibly powerful, and losing 1 or sometimes 2 life, although pretty rarely 2 life, is almost always worth it to be able to get an extra card because the cards in this deck convert to so much damage.
Yeah, that makes sense. So those are the 2 main brute staples. I mean, everything in here is a lot of very much staples. We also got Show of Strength. That's also from the new set. I assume this is just because it's stupid good value.
Yeah, I think that most of the time it's actually a little bit worse than Swing Big, although it does vary from matchup to matchup.
Mm-hmm.
But another copy of Swing Big is exactly what the deck is looking for. You already have a lot of really good red attacks in your draw discards, but another copy of a 3-block attack that's a couple points above rate is
Mm-hmm.
exactly what Brute's looking for, in the sense of it's another card that's very powerful, but doesn't force you to play into the inherent variance of Brute as much. Like, it's still very passable to have a turn where you go block 6, send a 2 for 8, and you're still 1 point above the core value rate of 13.
Got it. Was there anything else in the main 49 here that you think is worth touching on, or should we jump down to the sideboard?
Uh, I can touch briefly on Energetic Impact. I think this was very much the last blue to make it into the deck. It's not particularly fantastic. It's the 2 of.
There we go.
It's not particularly fantastic, but in a pinch, it allows you to make a Vigor token, which again works pretty well with that Wild Ride 2-cost and Arsenal cost curve that we were discussing earlier.
Mm-hmm.
And then it also just blocks 3. It's a 3 for 5. It basically does the same thing as all the other attacks, but it potentially can get you some additional value defensively, which sometimes the deck does need to block.
Got it. Cool. And then let's jump down to your sideboard. You got 26 over there. We'll touch on the equipment real quick. I see that you got Beaten Trackers, Crown of Providence, Spring Tunic, Scab Skins, and Skullhorn. So, yeah, we didn't have boots up in the top. So I guess you're swapping out the boots probably most often. What is your default? Like, for somebody who's just like, I don't have the brain, I'm just going to throw 1 set in. What is it?
Yeah, so I think if I was going to just play 1, I would probably play Beaten Trackers. Beaten Trackers shines in the aggro matchups and the games where your opponent isn't sending very much disruption at you. It does a couple things for you. The first thing that it allows you to do is it kind of lets you turn your Bear Fangs into Wild Rides,
Okay.
because it allows you to use them as starters, because generally the issue with attacks that have go again that don't discard cards is that they don't turn on your Mandible Claw. They don't allow you to extend your turn very well.
Mm-hmm.
But if you play like a Bear Fangs and then you break your Beaten Trackers, it's basically like you played a Wild Ride, but you usually get like 2 points of value from your from Bear Fangs because it attacks for 2 more instead of getting go again. So in that sense, Beaten Trackers is worth 3. Scabskins is also worth 3 in that scenario. The difference between Scabs, because it blocks for 3,
Mm-hmm.
the difference between Beaten Trackers and Scabskins is that Scabskins is usually 3 defensive value, whereas Beaten Trackers is 1 defensive and 2 offensive. So when you're trying to be proactive and in shorter games, Beaten Trackers is better. On the other hand, Scabskins is better in longer games because when you do need to roll, fundamentally rolling Scabs is positive math because you'll get more than 1 action point 50% of the time, and you'll only go to no action points 16% of the time. Obviously, it's very risky to do so,
Yeah.
especially if you have like a larger hand. But in some matchups, especially like the Florian matchup, you sometimes do need to roll Scabs in order to win.
Got it.
Um,
And then for instance, for like the Scabskins, just hypothetically, like when do you want to roll and when do you not want to roll? Is it just like flooring you're rolling just because you need it to get past breakpoints, or is it just like dependent on every hand? I assume it obviously it depends on every hand that you have. You're not going to do it every single turn,
yeah,
but like, what's a good rule of thumb for that?
yeah. So generally, if my opponent, generally, not always, but generally, if my opponent is attacking me and I have the opportunity to block, I will just block and not roll Scabs. Usually, when I'm rolling Scabs is when I attack my opponent, they block very heavily and then don't attack me. Or in the case of like Verdance, although I wouldn't play Scabs into Verdance. Maybe another deck that does arcane damage, or a deck damage that's like maybe a Florian playing a Germinate and setting up Rune Chance,
Mm-hmm.
like setting up damage that I'm not able to interact with. I'm only activating Scabs when I didn't have to take damage to do it. So if my opponent attacks me for 8, I'd rather, and my hand doesn't convert offensively, I'd rather block for 6 and send, 7 to 9 back at them, rather than say no blocks and roll the bones. But if I had a really good Blood Rush turn, I sent 20 damage at my opponent, they just blocked out and took the rest of the damage. That might be a scenario where I'd roll Scabs and try and go for another good turn to try and keep them in the blocking blender, because chances are if I'm able to hit them really hard on that turn, there's a decent chance I'll draw into go again on the following turn and then able to keep up the pressure.
Got it. That makes sense. Then I see we got Crown and Tunic. When are we bringing Crown in over
Yeah,
Scowling?
so these are a bit more rare. Crown of Providence is basically just for the Gravy Bones matchup. Um, Gravy Bones is a very interesting matchup in that you're not super great at killing their allies. You can kill Chums with Wild Rides reasonably well, and you can use Mandible Claws on their 3 health allies, but it requires you very specific hand textures to do so.
Mm-hmm.
And so generally the way that you beat Gravy Bones is just punching them in the face really hard. And so the way that they can stop you from doing that is by sending Conqueror of the High Seas at you, because in order to actually push damage through, you often need to set up an arsenal. And so generally, the way that we want to use Crown of Providence is basically just as a get out of jail free card, from the first Conqueror of the High Seas to allow us to be as aggressive as possible.
Got it. And then Tunic.
Yep, Tunic is for the Earth Heroes and the slower matchups. It's very good into Florian and Kasai. It kind of lets us do a Vigor impression where it lets us play double 2 cost in a turn without Claw on smaller hands, and it also can bail us out from all red hands. Like, for example, there can be some matchups like the Florian matchup where if you draw a single all red hand, it can be a death sentence. And so what Tunic can allow you to do is get you that extra resource, which in many scenarios ends up being worth a card when you otherwise would have had to pitch 2 reds to play a 2 cost attack.
Got it. And then we got Skullhorn, which obviously you're just bringing in for AB, never actually activating it. Is that accurate?
Very rarely. Occasionally on a Blood Rush turn, it will be worth it to do so. Specifically, like if you have a Blood Rush hand and you draw, let's say you had a 4-card hand, you pitch a blue, you had a red and a blue in your hand, you discard a blue, you draw double red, so you now have 2 resources floating and 3 reds in your hand, and you think that if you had a second blue, you might be able to win the game. That might be a scenario where you would YOLO on the Skullhorn and hope to draw blue and then discard a red, which, to be fair, the deck is half blues, and if you did draw blue, you're very unlikely to, but yeah, for the most part, we're not activating Skullhorn. It comes into basically just Verdance. Most of the decks that would send Rune Chants at you, like Vincent or Florian, Kayo doesn't really want to block that much, and especially not into decks like Florian. If we're going to block, we aren't able to block them out completely, so we would rather just block on their physical attacks. And so I run AB0 into Florian, but into Verdance it's pretty nice because if they're going first, they're instead of leaking 6 Arcane on you turn 0, they'll only leak 4. And it lets you fight over the Strider's endgame a little bit better, where if you often get in these scenarios where they send a 6 Arcane at you, you're forced to go below 9 life, you're in Strider's range, but you're able to present lethal while still holding 2 resources up, and so they're not able to go off, and are just forced to like continually block out basically.
Got it.
And you can potentially win despite going below 9 life against Verdance, which is pretty good.
Okay, that makes sense. And then the rest of the cards that are not equipment, what is in here? Because you're obviously bringing in about what 11 cards every game. What is your thought process on this?
Yeah, so generally, it depends from matchup to matchup, but for the most part, we're trying to either in aggressive matchups, we're trying to have good blocking cards where we're not necessarily trying to block, but in aggressive mirrors, it's important to have a lot of good blocking cards because in end games you will be forced to block. And while KO does have really good numbers, one way that he can lose from a winning position is you draw a hand of 4 no blocks. If you had just been able to block with 2 cards and then send 2 cards back at them, you would have been able to, force them to block down and then win the game. But you potentially lose because you draw 3 no blocks in a hand. And so in the other reason why we're running more blocking cards into the aggressive matchups is cards like Reckless Stampede are a lot worse against aggro. And that's primarily because they don't want to block you. If you're playing against a Syndra or an Arachne Marionette, both of these are decks that if they're drawing their perfect hands, sometimes they will block, but if they're drawing their perfect hands, they're just saying no blocks most turns. And so a 2 for 7 is 1 point above rate, but the games that it will lose you to not blocking in the end game is generally more than the games that will win you from being able to cast it. Because a lot of the time, if you're able to send like a 2-card 9 when your opponent's at like 2 or 3 life, they'll just have to give 3 cards to it, and then you're able to like put them in a blocking pattern.
Yeah, that definitely makes sense.
Other than that, into the aggressive deck, Strongest Survive is pretty interesting because it, for the most part, has kind of eclipsed cards like Send Packing or Command and Conquer that were previously played in the KO lists. The thing that's really strong about Strongest Survive is it's a card that works pretty well with Blood Rush in the sense that it scales how much they need to block it with how much it's attacking for, so it also works with your gauntlets.
Yeah.
And the other thing that's pretty good is it's not dependent on your opponent having an arsenal or not, which is something that a lot of aggressive decks have gotten pretty good at doing, especially with cards like Plow Under being very popular in the Earth decks, where you play this and they have to interact with it no matter what. They always have to give usually a card or 2 to it, and it doesn't really matter whether you whether they have an arsenal or not.
That makes sense. Yeah, I know this seems like a really good card, and it feels like it would also be good into basically any warrior as well.
Yeah, it's interesting. I don't board it into the warriors,
Really?
which, yeah, I think it's surprising for a lot of people. But the thing about the warriors is, especially most of the played warriors are the Valiant Dynamos warriors, and those are decks that are very willing to block. And so the way that you're going to beat those decks is by playing a lot of cards that have Go Again and cards that synergize with Go Again. And that generally means 2 costs, because 2 costs work with your Wild Ride cost curves, 2 costs work better with gauntlets, because if you think about 2 costs, they're basically 3 costs in disguise if you have your gauntlets of Tyrannical Rex. And also they just scale better when you draw reds. Like, for example, common play that you'll have is you'll be like, Wild Ride, pitch a blue. I have a blue and a red in my hand. I'm either going to draw a blue or a red, and then I'm either going to discard a blue or a red. And so if I draw a red and then I discard my blue, I get in this position where I have a resource floating and 2 reds in hand. I have had scenarios where I have boarded in my Strongest Survives, and the 2 cards left in my hand are Strongest Survive, and all I can do is Swing Claw for 3, where I would have much rather played something like a Bare Fangs or a Swing Big.
Yeah.
And so it's interesting for sure. I think that it's the kind of card that when it's resolved to its maximum is very punishing. but I think it's also the kind of card that could potentially lose you games because you either play it at a time when your opponent was already happy to block you, or you draw it with too many reds and it clunks up your hand.
Got it. Yeah. See, there's levels to this. I wasn't even thinking about that. I was just thinking about the on-hit effect. Like, they don't even run attack, so they obviously have to block it or discard. But yeah, that's a different way to view that I was not thinking of. Anything else in this sideboard that's worth touching on? I see we get the Reckless Stampedes,
Yeah.
Tandem from Loom.
Yeah, so I have 4 Buckwilds in the main deck, and then into decks like Florian Kasai, you can board up to the full 9. This is basically just extra copies of Wild Ride. They don't discard you a card, which doesn't turn on KO, but they are just fundamentally like a point or two above rate, and they curve very well with all of the 2 costs in the deck. And so they allow you, if you send like a Buckwild, activate your Gauntlets into a Swing Big, that's just a very solid 4-card 16. Into these decks like Kasai, they will consistently send 16 value on offense and defense, but they're not able to just straight up block 16 unless they have just like quad D react or whatever. And in that scenario, they're just giving you time to draw into your blood rushes. And so your goal into these matchups is you're basically trying to send as much damage at them as possible, because what they want to do is they want to attack some and they want to block some. And if they're attacking and blocking adds up to like slightly more value than you, that's okay, because you have the power turns of your blood rushes to try and push through and push over. And then additionally, like having additional go agains on your blood rush turns is quite good. Like on a 5-card hand, you can often struggle to convert fully unless you have a go again, and so having a higher density of go agains is pretty good into those matchups.
That makes sense. Anything else on this list you'd like to touch on, or you think would be good for people?
Yeah, Vigorous Smash-Up is a card that I have in the main deck, but I'm running some more copies of in the sideboard. This is the yellows and the reds are quite a bit worse than the blues, but in the matchups where you do have to block, they allow you to get some additional value out of blocking. Generally, if you look at most decks that aren't KO and don't need to run 57 sixes in their deck, they're running defense reactions, they're running Sink Below, Favor Scene, Shelter from the Storm. And so that's the way that decks gain value both offensively and defensively. KO doesn't really get to do that. And so instead what we're doing is we're running cards like the Smash Ups, which gain you 4 value, but just in a slightly different way. I would argue that it's still a little bit worse than cards like Favor Scene and Sink Below, because you're not able to block breakpoints. But Vigor tokens are very powerful, and so having additional access to them is pretty good, especially in matchups where we're not always getting to keep a 5-card hand like Mario.
Got it. Anything else on this list?
Yeah, I think the last one is pretty much No Fear. No Fear was pretty much an all-star for me. It's quite good into the Earth decks. If your opponent plays a Felling of the Crown and you have No Fear in your hand, you just get to banish your hand. You don't have to bottom a card, and so effectively it blocks for 5, and then it stops you from bottoming a card, so it's a 1-card 8. Into something like a Plow Under in Arsenal, it's even better. It's also pretty good into Mario. You do need to be very careful about how you use it, because if you use it before they flick, they can flick and eat all the prevention up in one instance. But it's mostly good as a way to not get disrupted. If your opponent sends a Leave No Witnesses at you and you play a No Fear from Arsenal, they could flick and they could still deal 4 damage to you, but you're not losing. Your opponent's not getting as much value out of their on-hits. And so between like that, Mark of the Black Widow, Kiss of Death under Black Widow, stuff like that, it just allows you to block while dodging disruption from a lot of the more disruptive decks in the format.
That's a really cool card. I haven't seen that one before, but I also have not really played much Brute, but that's actually really interesting.
Yeah, it was really cool against New, because New could play your blue cards from the Banish Zone, so you had to be very careful about when you cast it, because if you played it and they still had cards in hand and they had a blue, they could activate New, play the card from your Banish Zone, and then it doesn't go back to your hand because it just like goes to your graveyard.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And so like that was a card that I played into New, because if they play Bonds of Agony, getting like not having any cards in your hand is really good, and they don't have Flick Knives, so they can't just like you're always getting the printed amount of value on the card. But sometimes you lose the cards and they don't make it back to your hand at the end of the turn.
That's pretty cool tech. Yeah, I think that covers the sideboard. For everybody at home, who do you think are your good matchups? Who are your bad matchups? Who are you trying to see in the Gem Lotto, and who are you trying to avoid?
Yeah, so two very good matchups for KO are Acilio and Prism. Both of these matchups, they start at less life, which is good for you. You present a very fast clock on them, and for Prism, you have a lot of poppers, so you're able to destroy their Phantasm attacks and not let them kind of get anywhere. For Acilio, you have Scowling Fleshbag, which is very powerful, but especially powerful into Acilio, where on their big combo turn, every additional card in their hand is worth, 5 to 10 points of additional value. And so if you look at Fleshbag being worth potentially 12 on the combo turn, that means that they have to deal like 50 damage or 60 damage to you in like 4 turns before you just like kill them by sending like 15 of them every turn when their hand doesn't block. Some good matchups. I think that Mario and Syndra are both matchups that are slightly favored. They're very tight. Definitely it takes you kind of like balancing on a knife's edge in terms of you've got to be able to be aggressive, but also understand when to block these decks that are. Cinder isn't inherently disruptive, but I think that the Mask Momentum Flick Knives combo is something where it forces your opponents to block.
Yeah.
Some matchups that are kind of tough for KO. I think Florian and Kasai. I think Florian is probably the toughest one, but Kasai is, I would say, slightly unfavored. I think one of the biggest reasons to bring KO to your RTN is that he doesn't really have any incredibly terrible matchups. Like you look at Gravy Bones, and he has like a really bad Acilio matchup. You look at Verdance. Verdance has a really bad Gravy matchup. You look at a deck like Florian, it has a pretty bad Acilio matchup. KO doesn't really have any of those. I think Florian is probably your closest. I would say it's probably somewhere in the like low 40% range, maybe high 30s, which is pretty bad,
Yeah.
admittedly. So if you have a lot of Florian in your at your RTN, I probably would not bring KO. But other than that, you present a very powerful game plan. You're doing very powerful things. You have power cards. You have games where you'll just be like, cool, I played Blood Rushes on turns 2 and 4, and then my armor got me the rest of the way there. And it's also just like a much more consistent deck than you would think from a brute, because all of your cards are sixes and you only have somewhere between like 3 to 5 misses in any given matchup. You don't often get these scenarios like you do in decks like Levia, where you're like, well, I was 85% to hit a 6 in this graveyard, but I didn't, so I guess I'm taking 8 Blood Debt this turn, and I'm probably going to lose the game. Like, KO doesn't really have that. You don't get some of the power that some of the other brutes do, like, for example, like Rhinar being able to kill someone from 20, or Levia getting to transform into Plasma Fett and play extra cards every turn. But I think that it's the most. It still has a lot of the raw power of the brutes, while still being incredibly consistent as well.
Got it. Well, that makes sense. I feel like I always get no, but the high rolls. That's the thing that like prevents or limits me from wanting to like completely commit to like a KO is the variance. And you're saying it's more consistent, but yeah, it seems to me, and take this with a grain of salt. But every time it's like if I see when I'm playing against a KO, if I see 2 blood rushes, I probably lose. If I see 1 or less, I feel like I win. Do you think that's valid? Like, because you're saying that you don't like. Are you playing expecting to see the blood rushes, or are you
I think
fine
it,
playing the
it
entire
really
game
depends
without
on the
seeing them?
matchup. I think, like, for example, into some of the decks that you're harder into, like I think into Kasai or Florian, you definitely need 2 blood rushes to win. But also, those are kind of the matchups that give you more time to play longer games. I think into the aggro decks, you can absolutely win without blood rush, but it definitely helps. I think one of the things that makes KO very powerful, I think one of the things that can maybe add to the consistency of a brute like KO is his armor is something that you get access to every game and is something that you can rely on every game. Where it's like no matter what, whether I discard 0 Beast Withins, or I discard 1 Beast Within, or I discard 2 Beast Withins, whether I resolve 0 Blood Rushes or 1 or 2, I always know that I'm going to have a good Sash turn. I know I'm going to have a Beaten Tracker's turn. I know I'm going to have a turn where I get to Fleshbag my opponent. And I know that I have these like strong value equipment in the Mandible Claw and the Gauntlets. And so I think that playing around KO's equipment is one of the ways that you can extract more consistency out of a
Got it.
hero that's like definitely like you look at its face value and it's like I play Wild Ride, I draw a discard. This determines whether my hand is 13 value or 18 value or whatever.
Yeah.
But I think the other thing is that like you kind of have to accept that like the math is in your favor. There will be games and there will be tournaments where you're like, well, I missed the 67 percenter on my draw discard. like twice a game, 2 games in a row, and now I'm out of the tournament. But like mathematically, the deck is good, and it will do the thing the majority of the time. And that's like kind of one of the biggest things with the ratios of the deck, because the deck has so much power in its red slot. We're able to play a little bit more consistency by playing more yellows and blues and making the deck function more often and doing the thing that it's trying to do more often. That's like the other thing with like the higher yellow count, is that you will get these scenarios where because of gauntlets, you'll be like, ooh, wild ride. I don't have my blue, so I can't send my Mandible Claw, but I still get to gloves and to send a 2 for 8. And that's still like 7 plus 9. That's still 16 value. That's still like solidly 16 is pretty much where you want to be. I think that like KO does have a little bit of a disadvantage because you have more 2 blocks and no blocks. You don't have a ton of 2 blocks, but you have a decent amount of no blocks, where you will sometimes lose end games because you don't have agency. But I think that it's made up for by just like the raw power. And the other thing is like you can beat anyone playing KO, because you can play against Assassin. You can be like, I know what Assassin is doing. I know exactly how to play around them. I know how to dodge the disruption, etc. You play against KO and they send 16 damage at you. Like it doesn't matter if you're like good at blocking Mark of Black Widow or Leave No Witnesses. You're still gonna leak like 6 damage or whatever.
Yeah.
And they're just gonna like keep doing that to you until you stop moving. It feels kind of like Kano in a way, where it's like you can beat anyone, but it feels a little bit more stable than Kano, where it's like, because you have the armor and because you have more of an ability to like kind of play a mid-range grind game, you still have more agency because you're playing more fundamental flesh and blood than something like a Kano is, or like a Cilia.
That makes sense. Yeah, if the way you're explaining that kind of made it feel like this is blackjack. Like if you're playing it correctly, odds are in your favor. You will lose sometimes. That's just statistics, but more often than not, if you're seeing it through to the end, you should have statistically higher probability of winning. So I don't know if that's a good example, but that's what came to mind when you were talking about the odds.
No, I 100% agree. And it's the kind of thing where it's like every deck in Fab and all card games has variance. KO's variance is definitely like more in your face. You're literally like drawing the Blood Rush Bellow and hoping to God that your opponent doesn't roll a 4, because then you're going to discard your Blood Rush and skip your turn. But like, if you look at other decks, Florian has the same thing. It's like, oh, did I draw Cadaverous Tilling before I draw Felling of the Crown? And like, even if it's less pronounced, a lot of the time that is the difference between whether Florian wins the game or not. And so I think a lot of decks have this kind of thing, and I think that KO is like pretty cool. If you're like, you're just embracing the variance, and you're like, I know that some games I'm going to lose, and it's going to be like, oh, why am I playing KO? I lost to discarding my Blood Rush off a Wild Ride. But you kind of get to sit in the satisfaction of like, this is really cool. I'm playing this deck that's just like mathematically quite strong, and so I'm not afraid of like being perceived as like the person playing the random deck, and I just like can be content in that I know the deck is good.
Got it. Makes sense. All right, cool. I think that kind of brings us to an end. You had your shout outs at the beginning, but I'll give you another one at the end. Is there anything else you'd like to shout out?
That's pretty much it. I'd like to shout out my family. They're always very supportive. I'm going to San Diego in February, and I'm going to Yokohama in April. So if anyone's there, wants to say hi, feel free.
Sick. Yeah, I thought about going to San Diego, but it's on Valentine's Day, and I don't know if my wife would appreciate that.
Fair enough, yeah.
But awesome. Well, I really do appreciate you taking the time to share your knowledge and the deck with everybody. I hope they got some value out of it. But I'm sure we'll see you around again, because you're relatively local to me, and you've been making a name for yourself. So once again, thanks, and I'll see you on the next one. Once again, I'd like to thank Jude Cornett for hopping on here and dropping some knowledge bombs for everybody. KO Armed and Dangerous is it's a good deck. I think it's I can't tell you at the time of this publishing, but as of right now, I know he's doing statistically very well in the RTN season. And if you're looking for a deck to just throw together and get a week's practice on to play it out, I think it's a pretty good deck. But regardless, I do appreciate you guys sticking around this long. If you have made it to this point, I would appreciate it if you guys could drop a comment, leave a like, subscribe, all that fun YouTube stuff. I do appreciate you guys sticking around and engaging. But aside from that, until next time, I'm Robert. and this is No Blocks.